They called her the witness, not for what she saw, but for what she refused to unsee. When interrogator Lyssa Kaede discovered that 17 documented cases of righteous judgment bore the same bureaucratic signature as 17 documented fabrications, she understood that truth and loyalty could become enemies. How does one serve the Emperor when his agents serve themselves? My name is Lyssa Kaede. I served as secondary analyst, grade 4, Ordo Hereticus Archive subsection, Theta, for 19 years, 3 months, and 11 days. This is my testimony, recorded in the final hours before my execution. I want you to understand that I believed before I knew, and that knowledge destroyed my faith, but preserved something more precious. The archive occupied the 93rd through 97th sublevels of Hive Secundus on Malekith Prime, a world whose sky had not been visible for 6,000 years. My workstation was designated Theta 47, third row from the main Vox conduit, position that allowed me to hear the hymns from the Chapel of Eternal Vigilance 3 floors above every 4th hour when the ventilation cycled. The temperature remained constant at 11 degrees Celsius, cold enough that my breath misted when I spoke the litany of cataloging each morning at 6 hours precisely. I wore the same gray robes as 43 other analysts in my subsection, the fabric rough enough to remind us that comfort bred complacency, the Imperial Aquila embroidered over the heart and thread that had been blessed by Canoness Viridia herself. During the consecration ceremony I had attended in my 3rd year of service, my work was sacred. I processed investigation reports from across the subsector, referencing suspected heresy against archive doctrine, verifying that the charges brought by interrogators matched the evidence they submitted, maintaining the integrity of records that proved the Emperor's justice was absolute. Each morning I would recite the prayer of clear seeing before activating my data slate. Each evening I would sign my name to the day's completed analyses, adding my certification to documents that would be stored in perpetuity as proof that the Imperium's judgment was righteous. I took pride in this. I believed that my precision served him on Terra, that every correctly filed report was a prayer made manifest, that the perfection of my records reflected the perfection of his will. The archive smelled of parchment and sanctified oil, the scent mixing with the ozone from the data, slates, and the faint sweetness of the incense that burned in censers at each row's end. We worked in silence, except for the soft scratching of styluses on parchment, the occasional murmur of a prayer, the mechanical clicking of data, slate keys. My supervisor, Proctor Helene, would walk the rows twice each shift, her augmetic left eye clicking and whirring as it scanned our work, her thin lips moving in silent recitation of the canticle of diligence. She told me once that I had the gift of certainty, that my faith made my analysis flawless because I understood the Emperor's enemies could not hide from his servants' perfect records. I believed her. I believed all of it. I remember the morning with crystalline clarity. 3rd day of the 5th week of the 3rd month. Year 417 of the 41st millennium by Terran reckoning. I had processed my morning ration of recaf, black and bitter as proper penance, and begun my assigned batch of 73 investigation reports from the previous standard month. The 47th file bore the designation Temperance Prime, population recorded as 17,400,000 souls. Charges listed as widespread heretical corruption of planetary leadership with evidence of chaos cult infiltration across 8 of 12 continental administrative zones. The investigation had been conducted by interrogator Malthus Vorn, a name I recognized from 71 previous reports over my years of service. His work was always thorough, his evidence documentation precise to the point of being pedantic. This pleased me, Precision was devotion made tangible. I opened the primary investigation summary, expecting the usual catalog of corrupted officials. Tainted symbols discovered in government buildings. Confessions extracted through sanctioned interrogation methods. Physical evidence of proscribed texts or artifacts. Instead, I found a single-paragraph conclusion. After thorough investigation spanning 47 days, no credible evidence of heretical activity discovered. Recommendation: no action required. Investigation closed. I blinked at the data slate, certain I had accessed the wrong file. But the header matched. Temperance Prime. Charges widespread heretical corruption. I scrolled to the secondary documents, searching for the cleansing authorization that surely must follow. Perhaps ordered by higher authority, who had access to intelligence beyond the interrogator's scope. I found it. Cleansing Order Sigma, Temperance, authorization code bearing the seal of Inquisitor Lord Hexamar himself. 17,400,000 souls consigned to the Emperor's mercy through orbital bombardment. Execution date: 3 standard weeks after the investigation concluded innocence. My hands had gone cold. I checked the dates 3 times. Investigation conclusion day 194. Cleansing order day 215. 21 days. The planet had burned 21 days after being declared clean. I told myself there must be an explanation. Perhaps new evidence had emerged. I searched the supplementary files for additional investigation reports, intercepted communications, intelligence from other sources. There was nothing. The cleansing order cited the original charges, not new evidence. Under the section marked justification, someone had written a single word in neat script. Necessary. I should have logged this as a filing error, a simple case of mismatched documents requiring correction. Instead, I sat at Theta 47 for 11 minutes by the chronometer on the wall, staring at that single word. Necessary. Not just, not righteous. Not holy. Necessary. The word felt wrong in my mouth when I tried to shape it silently, tasted of ash and doubt. I closed the file and moved to the next report in my batch. But my hands were shaking, and I had to pause to recite the prayer of steadfast purpose 3 times before I could focus. That night I lay in my habitation cell, a space exactly 3 meters by 4 meters, furnished with a cot, a small shrine to the Emperor, and a footlocker containing my 3 changes of robes and personal effects permitted by regulation. I stared at the ceiling and tried to rationalize what I had seen. Perhaps the interrogator had been compromised. His report falsified by the very heretics he sought. Perhaps the cleansing had targeted other threats he had not been authorized to know about, compartmentalization being necessary for operational security. Perhaps my understanding was simply insufficient to grasp the strategic necessities that guided inquisitorial decision, making at levels beyond my clearance. These explanations felt hollow, but I clung to them. The alternative was unthinkable. For 3 days I processed my assigned reports without incident. On the 4th day, I encountered another discrepancy. The world was called Salvation's End. Population 800,000. Charges of mutation among the worker population in Manufacturum, Complex 17. The investigation report was thorough, including genetic screening results from the suspected workers. The results showed negative for all markers of chaos. Taint, radiation-induced mutation, or xenobiological contamination. The report concluded, suspected mutations are within acceptable baseline human variants. No evidence of heretical cause or effect. Workers cleared for continued service. The cleansing order was dated 5 days before the investigation began. I felt something crack inside my chest, a physical sensation like ice breaking under pressure. I pulled up the previous case, Temperance Prime, and examined the dates again with new attention. Investigation conclusion, day 194. but the cleansing order authorization code contained a timestamp in its metadata. I had never thought to check metadata before. Why would I? Orders came from authority. Authority was sacred, but I checked now. The cleansing order for Temperance Prime had been generated on day 173. 21 days before the investigation concluded. 3 weeks before Interrogator Vorn declared the planet innocent. They had decided to kill 17 million people before they knew if those people deserved to die. I began searching for other cases. I did not do this openly. I processed my assigned work during my shift, maintained my perfect record of completeness and accuracy, recited my prayers at the appointed times. But I began arriving at Theta 47 1 hour before the start of shift, when the archive was nearly empty and Proctor Helene had not yet begun her rounds. I began requesting access to closed case files for what I claimed was quality assurance review, verifying that older records matched current filing standards. No one questioned this. Quality was devotion. Thoroughness was faith. Over the next 2 months, I reviewed 137 investigation reports that had concluded with planetary cleansing operations. Of these, 47 showed the same pattern. Investigation concluded innocence or insufficient evidence. Cleansing order proceeded anyway. Some of the orders pre-dated the investigations by weeks, some by months. In 6 cases, the cleansing order had been generated before the investigation even began. As if the conclusion had never been in question, the investigation merely procedural formality, I found myself unable to eat. The morning recaf tasted like copper and ash. At night I would lie in my cell and calculate. 47 worlds, estimated population figures from the reports. I added them in my head, unable to stop myself. 793 million people. Not all of them heretics. Not even most of them. The investigations had said so. Our own interrogators had investigated and found them innocent, and they had burned anyway. The night I reached that number, I vomited into the waste reclamation unit in my cell until my throat burned and my vision swam. I knelt before my shrine, a simple thing bearing a small bronze aquila and a candle that I lit each evening, and I tried to pray. The words would not come. Instead, I found myself whispering the numbers. 47 worlds. 793 million souls. 47 investigations that concluded innocence. I did not know what this prayer meant, only that I could not stop speaking it. I began to notice patterns I had never seen before. The cleansing orders often came in clusters, 3 or 4 worlds within the same subsector, condemned within weeks of each other. I referenced this against production reports from the Munitorum, requisition orders for military resources, troop deployment schedules. The pattern was subtle but clear once I knew to look for it. Cleansings increased during periods of resource scarcity. When the subsectors tie the requirements rose, when war fronts demanded additional troops, when manufacturum output needed to be redirected, when food production could not match demand. I found a report buried in an addendum file, something that had been included almost by accident, a logistics analysis prepared by a Munitorum administrator. It was dry, technical, filled with tables and calculations. It analyzed the resource cost of maintaining a planetary population versus the cost of cleansing and resettlement. It concluded, in flat bureaucratic language, that for worlds with populations below 2 million whose production output fell beneath certain thresholds, cleansing and resettlement of fresh colonists was more economically efficient than infrastructure improvement or population re-education programs. The report ended with a recommendation that such analysis be conducted for all low-performing worlds in the subsector. There was a handwritten note in the margin, nearly illegible, that read, implemented. See attached quota schedules. I requested the attached documents through official channels, citing cross-reference verification requirements. It took 4 days for the request to be processed. When the files arrived at Theta 47, I waited until my shift ended and the archive had emptied before opening them. The quota schedules were exactly what the margin note suggested. Recommendations for minimum number of cleansing operations per standard year, organized by subsector, adjusted for strategic priorities and resource availability. The numbers varied. Some years called for 8 operations, some for 17. The current year's recommendation was 43. I checked the current year's completed cleansing operations. We were at 39. There were 4 months remaining in the administrative year. My hands were steadier than I expected when I closed the file. Something had shifted inside me. Some fundamental architecture of belief had collapsed and been replaced by a terrible clarity. This was not corruption. Corruption was deviation from purpose, individual moral failure, the weakness of mortal servants failing to live up to sacred ideals. What I was seeing was not failure. It was function. The system was working exactly as designed. The investigations were not meant to determine guilt or innocence. They were meant to provide documentation, to create the appearance of process, to generate records that could be archived and cited as proof that justice had been served. I thought of Interrogator Vorn, whose reports I had processed for years, whose meticulous documentation I had admired. Had he known? When he wrote that Temperance Prime was innocent, when he recommended no action, had he known that his report would be filed and then ignored, that his conclusion was irrelevant to a decision that had already been made? Did he sign those reports with steady hands or shaking ones? Did he pray before writing his conclusions, or had he stopped praying years ago? I needed to understand. I needed someone to explain how this could be reconciled with the teachings I had memorized. The sermons I had heard in the Chapel of Eternal Vigilance, the sacred duty we claimed to serve. I requested a meeting with Proctor Helene, citing questions about proper documentation procedures for complex investigations. She granted the meeting immediately. I had never requested guidance before. My work had always been perfect. Her office was on the 95th sublevel, a space barely larger than my habitation cell, dominated by a desk of dark wood that must have been imported at considerable expense. The walls were covered in commendations, certifications, seals of approval from inquisitors and Lord Inquisitors spanning decades of her service. She sat behind that desk with her hands folded, her augmetic eye regarding me with its inhuman steadiness, while her organic eye showed something that might have been concern. I asked about discrepancies in case files. I did not mention specific worlds or numbers. I simply described the pattern. Investigations concluding innocence followed by cleansing operations, cleansing orders that pre-dated investigative conclusions. The correlation between resource pressures and increased cleansing frequency. I presented it as an analytical puzzle, a question of proper procedure, my voice steady and professional, the voice of a devoted servant seeking to understand so she might serve more perfectly. Proctor Helene listened in silence. When I finished, she was quiet for long enough that I began to fear I had made a catastrophic error, that I would be reported for questioning, that my words themselves were heresy even if my conclusions were correct. Then she spoke, and her voice was not angry. It was tired. Tired in a way that suggested decades of exhaustion compressed into each syllable. She told me that I had good eyes, that my observation was correct and my analysis sound, that the pattern I had identified was not error or corruption, but procedure, documented in protocols that existed at classification levels beyond my clearance. She told me that the Imperium spanned 1,000,000 worlds and faced threats that could annihilate humanity utterly. That the scale of danger was beyond comprehension. That hard decisions were required to preserve what could be preserved. She told me that mercy, applied individually, was a virtue, but mercy, applied systematically across populations, was a luxury that would doom the species. I asked her how killing innocent populations served the Emperor. My voice cracked on the word innocent. She noticed. She looked at me with her organic eye. The augmetic having ceased its mechanical movements, both eyes now fixed on mine. She told me that fear was the Imperium's greatest weapon against its own population. That the threat of death for heresy kept trillions of souls in line, kept them obedient, kept them from questioning, from demanding, from rebelling. But that threat had to be real. It had to be demonstrated. It had to be seen to be absolute, indiscriminate, unavoidable. If populations believed that only the guilty burned, then the innocent would feel safe to question, to resist, to drift toward independence. But if anyone could burn, if entire worlds could be cleansed regardless of guilt, if investigation was theater and judgment was arbitrary, then everyone lived in perpetual fear. And fear, she said, was more efficient than faith. She told me that there was a text, not widely distributed, but studied by those at certain levels of authority. It was called The Necessity of Darkness, a treatise prepared by the Inquisitorial conclave in the wake of the Horus heresy, when the Imperium had nearly been destroyed from within. The text argued that humanity's greatest threat was not external forces, but its own tendency toward pride, independence, free thought, the dangerous assumption that individual human judgment was worth trusting. The treatise concluded that humanity could only survive if it remained perpetually terrified, if the weight of potential judgment was so crushing that the thought of resistance became literally unthinkable. The cleansings, the arbitrary executions, the systematic demonstration that innocence provided no protection, these were not failures of justice. They were implementation of policy, deliberate, calculated, perpetual. I could not speak. My throat had closed. She continued as if my silence was expected. She told me that she had questioned this herself, decades ago, when she was young and believed that righteousness meant protecting the innocent. She told me that she had brought her concerns to her own superior, much as I had brought mine to her. She told me that she had been given the same explanations I was now receiving, and that she had faced the same choice. I now faced. Accept that the Imperium's survival required horrors, or reject the system and be destroyed by it. She told me she had chosen survival, that she signed authorization codes for reports she knew would be ignored, filed investigations whose conclusions were irrelevant, maintained the records of systematic murder with steady hands because someone had to do this work, and it was better that it be done by someone who understood what was being done, who bore the weight of that knowledge rather than delegating it to someone who might enjoy the power. She told me her hands shook when she signed certain documents, that she had not slept soundly in 30 years, that she did not know if her choice had been correct, that she had never known, that certainty was a luxury she had sacrificed. But that inaction was also a choice, and that choice was complicity of a different kind, the complicity of pretending ignorance could constitute innocence. She had chosen to act, to maintain the system, to be the mechanism through which horrors were documented and legitimized, because the alternative was to let others, perhaps less burdened by conscience, perform the same function. She asked me what I would choose. I left her office and walked through the archive in a daze. The other analysts sat at their stations, processing reports, maintaining records, serving the Emperor with perfect precision. They believed what I had believed, that the work was sacred, that the deaths were just, that the investigations uncovered truth and the cleansings purified corruption. They did not know. Or perhaps they did know, and had made the same choice as Proctor Helene, had accepted that survival demanded atrocity, had learned to function within the system while carrying the weight of understanding what they maintained. I returned to Theta 47 and sat in my chair. My assigned batch of reports waited on my data slate. I was expected to process them, to verify documentation, to certify that procedures had been followed, to add my signature to the archive's eternal record. 43 reports remained in this month's assignment. Simple work, routine work, sacred work. I could not make my hands move toward the data slate. That night I did not return to my habitation cell. I went instead to the Chapel of Eternal Vigilance, climbing the 3 floors through maintenance shafts to avoid being seen entering outside of sanctioned prayer hours. The chapel was empty, lit only by candles burning before the altar, a massive bronze aquila that gleamed in the flickering light. I had come here every week for 19 years, had recited the liturgies, had believed that each prayer strengthened the Imperium, had felt the Emperor's presence in the architecture and incense and sacred words. I knelt before the altar, but I could not pray. Instead, I thought of my sister. Her name was Marin. She had been 9 years old when I last saw her, a child with dark hair and quick laughter who wanted to be a pilot someday, who drew pictures of ships flying between stars and showed them to me with pride that glowed in her eyes. We had lived on Tertius Meridian, a modest world in the Calixus sector, a place where people worked in textile manufactorums and grew grain in vast hydroponic facilities and raised families in crowded but functional hive blocks. It was not a rich world, but it was home. The Inquisition had come when I was 17 and Marin was 9. They had investigated suspected heresy among the textile workers, claims that forbidden texts were being distributed, that some workers were teaching their children to question the Imperial creed. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. I never saw the results. I only saw the cleansing ships in orbit, saw the warnings broadcast on every Vox grill, saw my parents frantically trying to secure passage off-world while knowing that every transport was already full, that the wealthy had bought their escape while we stood in crowds of desperate thousands waiting for permission that would never come. I survived because I was selected. The Inquisition needed scribes, young literate persons who could be trained to maintain their records. They came through the crowds with data slates, testing reading comprehension and devotional knowledge. I passed. They took me. They took 240, 7 of us, young people between 15 and 20 who could read and write and recite the basic litanies. The rest burned, 17 million souls. That was the official death count from Tertius Meridian. I had processed the file myself in my 4th year of service, had seen the investigation report that I was not authorized to read in full, had seen the cleansing authorization that I accepted without question, because authority was sacred and justice was absolute, and my family's death must have served some purpose. Must have been necessary, must have been righteous. I had never accessed the full investigation file. I had never questioned. I had accepted their deaths as the price of purification, had channeled my grief into service, had become the perfect analyst, because if I was perfect enough, precise enough, faithful enough, then their deaths would have meaning, would be transformed from tragedy into sacred necessity. I accessed the full file now, sitting in the empty chapel with my data, slate in trembling hands. The investigation report was 73 pages long. It documented interviews with 211 textile workers. It included testimony extracted through sanctioned interrogation methods. It documented the discovery of 14 prohibited texts, hand-copied pages from Imperial philosophical treatises discussing the nature of freedom and individual conscience. The interrogator's conclusion was damning evidence of heretical ideology detected. Recommend immediate cleansing to prevent spread. But there was a supplementary file, an addendum prepared by a different interrogator, a review requested by some higher authority. The review examined the same evidence. It noted that the prohibited texts showed no signs of chaos taint, that they were ancient philosophical works that predated the Imperium, that their content was heretical only in the sense of questioning authority, not in the sense of worshipping forbidden powers. It noted that the workers were not cultists, but simply people who were curious, who wanted their children to think and question and understand. The review concluded, heresy of ideology, not corruption. Recommend re-education programs, not cleansing. Population otherwise loyal and productive. The review was dated 4 days before the cleansing order was issued. Someone had read that recommendation, had understood that 17 million people were not corrupted by chaos, but simply questioning authority, and had ordered them killed anyway. My sister had died because people wanted to think. My parents had burned because they lived on a world where curiosity had become a capital offense. I had been selected for service because the Inquisition needed scribes, and it was more efficient to recruit from the condemned than to train volunteers. I had been made complicit in the system that murdered my family. I had spent 19 years maintaining the records of that murder. I had believed it was sacred. I do not remember leaving the chapel. I found myself in my habitation cell with the sun rising, though I did not recall walking there. My hands were steady. I felt empty, hollowed out, as if grief and rage and guilt had burned through me so completely that nothing remained but ash and clarity. I understood now what choice lay before me. I could accept what Proctor Helene had accepted. I could continue processing reports, maintaining files, adding my certification to investigations I knew were theater and cleansings I knew were murder. I could become part of the machine, a willing component in the apparatus of systematic atrocity, justifying it with the knowledge that someone had to do this work and better. It be someone who understood the horror of what they enabled. I could tell myself that I was choosing the lesser evil, that the system would function with or without me, that my individual refusal would change nothing except to end my life and replace me with someone perhaps less burdened by conscience. Or I could refuse. I could reject the system, document what I had discovered, attempt to expose the truth, even knowing that truth was heresy, that questioning authority was the very crime for which worlds burned. I could accept that my refusal was symbolic, that it would accomplish nothing except my own death, that the machine would grind on without me. But I would die as myself. I would not become what the system required. I would not sign my name to another report, knowing what that signature enabled. The choice was not between good and evil. It was between different forms of complicity, different modes of participation in horrors. I lacked the power to prevent. I could be complicit through action, maintaining the system while knowing its nature. Or I could be complicit through existence, living in the Imperium that was built on these foundations, benefiting from the fear that kept populations obedient, surviving only because I had been selected while my family burned. There was no innocence available. Only choices about what kind of guilty I would become. I made my choice with steady hands. I gathered the files I had compiled, the 47 investigations that concluded innocence followed by cleansing, the quota schedules, the resource optimization analyses, the text of The Necessity of Darkness that I had discovered buried in classified archives Once I knew what to search for, I organized them into a coherent narrative, a documented proof that the Imperium's justice was theater and its cleansings were administrative convenience. I encrypted the compilation and transmitted it to 7 different archives across the subsector. Addresses I had harvested from inter-departmental communications, locations where curious archivists or junior analysts might discover what I had discovered, where the knowledge might spread like infection. Then I walked to Proctor Helene's office and confessed everything. I told her what I had found, what I had compiled, what I had transmitted. I told her I would not process another report. I told her I would not certify another investigation. I told her I would not be complicit anymore. She listened with that same exhausted expression, her augmetic eye clicking softly as it focused on my face. When I finished, she closed her organic eye for a long moment. When she opened it, something that might have been respect flickered there briefly before duty reasserted itself. She told me I had made my choice. That she understood it, perhaps even envied it, but that she could not protect me from the consequences. That I would be classified as a heretic, that my transmission would be traced and purged, that my files would be burned and my name erased from every record as if I had never existed. That I would be executed within the day, my body rendered to feed the recycling systems that sustained the hive, my soul consigned to whatever waited beyond death. That everything I had tried to accomplish would be undone, and the system would continue exactly as it had before I was born. She asked me if I understood. I told her I understood. That I had known the consequences before I acted, that I was not trying to save the Imperium or redeem its sins. I was simply refusing to participate. I was choosing to die as myself rather than live as the thing the system required me to become. She nodded slowly. Then she did something I did not expect. She stood, walked around her desk, and placed her hand on my shoulder. Her grip was firm, her fingers trembling slightly. She told me that she would remember me, that my name was Lyssa Kaede, that I had served with perfect precision for 19 years, that I had been the most faithful analyst in her subsection before I learned what faith actually meant. She told me that she did not know if I was brave or foolish, right or wrong. She told me that she envied my certainty, even as she knew her own uncertainty was what allowed her to continue functioning. Then she activated her Vox grill and summoned the arbitrators. They came within the hour. I did not resist. There was no point. They bound my wrists and led me through the archive, past the rows of analysts who did not look up from their data slates, past the shelves of files that documented 10,000 years of justified murders, down through maintenance corridors to the detention level where heretics awaited judgment. The cell they placed me in was 3 meters by 2 meters, smaller than my habitation cell, lit by a single dim lumen globe that flickered irregularly. The walls were bare ferrocrete, cold and damp. There was a drain in the floor that smelled of old blood. I sat on the bare floor and waited. I did not pray. I could not speak to the Emperor anymore. Perhaps I had never spoken to him, only to the idea of him that the Imperium had constructed, the divine authority that justified every atrocity as sacred necessity. I did not know if the Emperor was the being the priests described, divine and eternal and perfect in wisdom. I did not know if he was aware of what was done in his name, if he approved of the cleansings and quotas and systematic murder. I did not know if he was even capable of caring. Locked in eternal battle on his golden throne, perhaps as much prisoner as savior. I knew only that I could not serve the system that claimed to serve him. That whatever he was, whatever he required, I could not believe he required me to be complicit in the murder of innocents. If that belief was heresy, then I was a heretic. If that choice was damnation, then I chose damnation. I would not surrender the last fragment of my humanity to a machine that consumed souls and called it righteousness. They came for me as the chronometer in the corridor indicated the 18th hour. Two arbitrators, their faces hidden behind helmets, their hands steady on shock mauls. They did not speak to me. I was not a person to them, just a task to be completed, a heretic to be erased. They led me through corridors I had never seen, deep into the hive's lower levels where the air tasted of chemicals and human waste. We entered a chamber that might once have been used for industrial processing, its walls stained with residue I did not examine too closely. There was a metal chair in the center of the room, equipped with restraints. There was a servo skull hovering near the ceiling, its sensors glowing red, recording everything for the archives. The arbitrators strapped me into the chair. One of them produced a data, slate and read the charges in a monotone voice. Heresy, questioning Imperial authority, disseminating information classified above my clearance level, refusing lawful orders, attempting to undermine the sacred work of the Inquisition. The sentence was death by execution, my body to be recycled, my name to be expunged from all records, my soul commended to the Emperor's judgment. He asked if I had any final words. I told him that my name was Lyssa Kaede, that I had served the Emperor faithfully for 19 years before I understood what that service enabled, that I had discovered the truth about the cleansings, about the quotas, about the systematic murder of innocents dressed in the language of righteousness, that I had chosen to refuse complicity even knowing it would cost me everything, that I did not expect to be remembered, but that I needed to say these words aloud, to affirm that I had existed, that I had known, that I had chosen. I told him that I died guilty of existing in the Imperium, of benefiting from its cruelties, of serving its machinery before I understood what I served, guilty of processing reports that enabled murders, of certifying investigations that were theater, of adding my name to the archive of systematic atrocity, guilty of silence while worlds burned, of faith when I should have questioned, of pride in precision that enabled horror. I did not claim innocence. I claimed only that I had refused to continue, that I had chosen to die as myself rather than live as what the system required. The arbitrator listened in silence. When I finished, he made a notation on his data slate. Then he raised his bolt pistol and placed the barrel against my forehead. The metal was cold. I could smell the gun oil and promethium. Could hear the servo, skull's sensors clicking as it recorded my final moments for archives that would erase every other trace of my existence. I closed my eyes. I thought of my sister, of her laughter and her dreams of flying between stars. I thought of my parents, burning with 17 million others on a world condemned for the crime of curiosity. I thought of the 793 million souls whose murders I had helped document, whose deaths I had certified as righteous before I knew better. I thought of Proctor Helene, her trembling hands and exhausted eyes, carrying the weight of knowledge while maintaining the system. I thought of all the analysts still working in the archive, believing their precision was prayer, not knowing that they maintained the machinery of systematic murder. I did not pray for salvation or forgiveness. I was beyond both. I prayed only that my refusal had meant something, even if only to myself. That the choice to die as myself, rather than live as complicit, was worth making, even if it changed nothing, even if the system ground on exactly as before. That dignity could exist in defeat. That conscience could survive the knowledge of its own powerlessness. I am dead now. I have been dead for 3 minutes. By the chronometer I can no longer see. My body cooling in a chair in a forgotten chamber. my blood-feeding recycling systems that will transform me into nutrient paste to feed the hive's workers. I am dead, but I am still speaking, still testifying. The words I recorded before my execution transmitted from encrypted archives that may survive the purge, or may be discovered and destroyed, may spread infection of knowledge, or may die unread in some forgotten server. I am dead, and the Imperium continues. The quotas remain. The cleansings proceed. The analysts process reports with perfect precision, believing their work is sacred, not knowing what they enable. The system functions exactly as designed, grinding souls to fuel its survival, calling murder necessity and atrocity righteousness. My death changes nothing. My refusal is a gesture without consequence, symbolism without substance. But I died as Lyssa Kaede. I died knowing what I knew, choosing what I chose, refusing what I refused. I died complicit in horrors I could not prevent, guilty of existence in a system I lacked power to change. Bearing the weight of knowledge that destroyed my faith but preserved something more precious. I died without innocence but with dignity. I died serving no purpose but my own conscience. I died as myself. You who discover this testimony, if you exist, if my encryption survives, if you read these words in some future moment when the choice becomes yours. I cannot tell you what to choose. I can tell you only that the choice exists, that knowledge demands decision, that understanding ends the luxury of unconscious participation. You can accept what the system requires, bearing the weight with exhausted conscience like Proctor Helene. You can refuse and die like me, a gesture without consequence except the preservation of self. You can pretend ignorance, processing reports without questioning, maintaining the machinery without understanding what you maintain. These are all forms of complicity. There is no innocence available in the Imperium. There is only choosing what kind of guilty you will become, and whether you can live with that choice. I could not live with mine, so I died instead. My name was Lyssa Kaede. I served as secondary analyst, grade 4, Ordo Hereticus Archive subsection Theta for 19 years, 3 months, and 11 days. I processed 17,412 investigation reports. I certified the documentation of horrors I believed were righteous. I discovered they were murder dressed as necessity. I refused to continue. I chose to die. This is my testimony. This is my witness. This is what I learned when faith died and knowledge became unbearable and choice became the only thing I could control. The Imperium calls this heresy. Perhaps it is. I call it truth. Perhaps that is the same thing. The Emperor protects, they tell us. But who protects us from those who protect us in his name? Who judges the judges? Who purifies the purifiers? These questions have no answers that the Imperium permits. So I died with the questions intact, preferring uncertainty to the terrible certainty of knowing that righteousness is theater and justice is quota and faith is the mechanism that makes good people maintain evil systems. I was complicit before I was a victim. I was faithful before I understood what faith enabled. I was certain before knowledge destroyed certainty. I am dead now, but my testimony survives, at least for this moment, transmitted from darkness to whoever inherits the choice I made. Make it well. Make it with eyes open. Make it knowing what you enable, understanding what you serve, bearing the weight of complicity that existence in this Imperium demands. But make it. Choose. The luxury of unconscious participation ends the moment you understand the system. After that, there is only choosing how you will participate, or refusing to participate and accepting the cost. I chose refusal. I paid the cost. I do not know if I was right. I know only that I could not choose differently and remain myself. My name was Lyssa Kaede. I am dead now. I have been dead for hours, for days, for years, depending on when you read this. But my words remain. My testimony persists. My choice stands recorded. Witness what I witnessed. Know what I knew. Choose what you choose. The system continues. The cleansings proceed. The analysts process reports. The archive grows. The machinery of systematic murder grinds on, calling itself righteousness, wrapping itself in sacred language, maintaining perfect records of justified horror. And somewhere, perhaps, someone reads these words and understands that faith and knowledge can become enemies, that loyalty and truth can diverge, that serving the Emperor and serving the Imperium are not always the same thing. I died believing this was true. I died choosing conscience over continuation. I died guilty but dignified, complicit but cognizant, destroyed but not diminished. I died as myself. That, in the end, was all I had left to preserve. So I preserved it, at the cost of everything else. My name was Lyssa Kaede. I was faithful before I knew better. I was complicit before I understood. I am dead now, but I died knowing. And knowledge, however terrible, was worth the price of certainty. This is my testimony. This is my witness. This is how I learned that the Imperium's survival is built on mountains of innocent dead, that righteousness is administrative convenience, that the Emperor's justice is quotas and cleansings and systematic murder dressed in sacred language. This is what faith became when it encountered truth. This is what I chose when choice became unavoidable. This is what remained when everything else burned: my name, my conscience, my refusal, myself. The rest is silence and ash and the endless grinding of machinery that will continue long after my death means nothing. Long after these words are discovered or destroyed, long after the Imperium forgets that I existed. But for this moment, I exist in these words: Lyssa Kaede, analyst, heretic, witness, dead but not erased, defeated but not silenced, destroyed but still speaking truth into the darkness that the Imperium calls righteousness. The Emperor protects. But I could not protect the innocent from those who claimed to serve him. So I died trying to protect the only thing I could still control: the truth of what I knew, the choice I made. Myself. It was enough. It had to be enough. It is all I have left to give. My testimony ends here, in this final transmission, encrypted and sent to archives that may preserve it or may purge it, may spread infection of knowledge or may die unread. I do not know its fate. I know only that I spoke, that I witnessed, that I refused, that I chose, that I died as myself, and that, in the end, was the only victory available to me in an Imperium where innocence provides no protection and righteousness is quotas and faith is the mechanism that makes good people maintain evil systems. Lyssa Kaede, secondary analyst, grade 4, Ordo Hereticus Archive subsection Theta. 19 years, 3 months, 11 days of service, dead now, but speaking still, witness, remember, choose.